Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel, and today on my Midweek Movies series, I'm going to be discussing a film that I recently watched that I really enjoyed. It's a classic melodrama from 1946-ish called Leave Her to Heaven, directed by John M. Stahl. And I'm really excited to dive into this one. I have been a really big fan of what are commonly called melodramas or women's pictures or weepies for quite a long time. It was one of my favorite things to study, even as far back as my undergrad days in college when I first started really studying film seriously. And I have always really enjoyed these films. The sort of example of the melodrama, mid-century melodrama, is the Douglas Sirk film. Douglas Sirk was the master of the melodrama. Melodramas are characterized by an emphasis on domestic issues and also heightened emotions and sort of exacerbated plot points or larger than life kinds of plot points, but still maintaining that sort of domestic emphasis. So these are all generally things that are going to be happening within the home, within the family. That's part of why these were also often called women's pictures, because they usually were focused a lot more on female characters, and they were aimed primarily at a female audience, particularly these sort of upper middle class white women that were sort of the bread and butter of movie audiences in the 1940s and into the 1950s. So these are a really interesting spate of films. And some of them, like Leave Her to Heaven, took on an almost noirish color as well. They had some influence from film noir creep into them and become almost domestic crime dramas in some ways. So the basic premise of Leave Her to Heaven is that this sort of stoic, square-jawed, all-American guy, he's a writer, he meets this woman, Jean Tierney. She's played by Jean Tierney, who's absolutely amazing in this role, by the way. They very quickly fall in love, have a whirlwind courtship. She actually breaks off her engagement to another man, played by Vincent Price, he's an excellent supporting role in this film. And they get married very quickly. And then things start to escalate as her love becomes obsession, and she becomes more and more fixated on having him all to herself, right? To the extent that she starts causing harm to the people around them and even potentially committing murder in order to sort of get him all to herself and make sure that he is entirely hers, right? This is an obsessive sort of unnatural love that she has for him. And meanwhile, he is more and more drawn to her adopted sister, who is, more of a classic good girl kind of archetype. And it sort of spirals from there. This is a absolutely gorgeous film, shot in Technicolor. There's several different locales that we see, from the New Mexico desert to the woods and lakes of Maine to the eastern seaboard. So there's like a number of different locations that we see, all in sort of beautiful Technicolor. Jean Tierney's performance in this is so good. As I said, Vincent Price plays a prosecutor, basically, who has a small but important supporting role, especially late in the film when there ends up being an actual murder trial going on. And he's amazing in it. I love Vincent Price, though, and anything that he's in, he's always fun to watch. So this is an absolutely super fun melodrama with an almost noirish twist, where we get Jean Tierney playing this woman who is, again, she's like trying to be the perfect wife and mother, but she is ultimately a very literal kind of femme fatale to the other people around them, as she becomes more and more obsessed with having her husband all to herself and only allowing and wanting him to be completely dependent upon her and her alone, right? So that's what I like about films like this, especially, is not just that they're super fun in the way that they're sort of exaggerated emotions and heightened realities, which they all do, and this one does particularly effectively, as many of the Douglas Sirk ones also do very effectively, but also in this time period, women are very constrained in the kinds of roles that they can inhabit, particularly, again, these white upper middle class women who are condemned to being the love interest, the happy stay-at-home wife and mother type, in order to be the good woman, to fit in with that good woman archetype. And the production code, which was the form of self-censorship that Hollywood had in place at this time, also very strictly defined the kinds of roles that women could have in films and the kinds of content that could be depicted in films around women's issues. And the only way for women to exhibit or express ideas that were outside of those norms was for them to be villainous, right? I think that's a lot of where we get the idea that villains tend to be more interesting than the good guys in movies, right? I think it's kind of a holdover from the production code era, where it is true that villains are often able to express ideas and have emotions that the good guys are simply not allowed to have, especially when those villains are women, right? And so as long as we can frame Jean Tierney in Leave Her to Heaven as a villainous and unnatural woman, and trust me, she is very unnatural and very villainous. It's heavily implied that her relationship with her dead father was almost incestuous, and one of the very first things she says to our male protagonist is that he looks just like her father, and that seems to be a big part of why she falls in love with him the way that she does, is because he looks so much like her father. So it's like we're heavily implying the incestuousness there, and her mother is very cold towards her because of her relationship with her father and all of this stuff. And yeah, she's absolutely willing to commit murder. She's definitely a villain, right? She's definitely a villain, but she's also, because she's a villain, right? Because she's so unnatural, because she's so villainous, she's able to express things that a good woman in the late 1940s absolutely would not be able to express, because that was completely taboo at the time, right? So there's a point in the film in which, at which Jean Tierney is found out that she's pregnant, right? She's pregnant, and she doesn't want it. She doesn't want the baby. She doesn't want to be a mother. She doesn't want to be pregnant. She hates what it's doing to her body. She hates the way that she is being physically restrained by her medical condition. She hates everything about this, right? She has no maternal instinct whatsoever, and she expresses it very explicitly. She's like, I hate this, I don't want this, I do not want to do this, this is not something I want. And it's this really fascinating, from a contemporary perspective, it's a really fascinating moment of subversion of those mid-century ideals of womanhood and what women were supposed to want and desire and work for, that it's absolutely fascinating. It's this great emotional moment where I genuinely felt for Jean Tierney in that moment, as someone who I would not want to be pregnant either, right? I'm not interested in being pregnant or being a mother. I felt for her, right? And it seems to me that it's very possible there may have been women in the audience in 1946 who that would have resonated with them in 1946, right? That sentiment of being trapped and being imprisoned by your own body through the process of pregnancy and childbearing, And some women just don't want that, right? But that was not allowed to be expressed if you wanted to be a good woman, right? Jean Tierney is able to express it in this context, in the context of this film, because she's a villain and she's going to be punished for expressing it. So I'm not saying that like it's that she's a good and empowered feminist heroine or something like that, right? She's not. She's definitely not. But again, the villainy and the context and being an unnatural, murderous kind of woman allowed these characters to express things that good women, quote unquote good women of the time, would not have been able to express. And that happens over and over and over again in these kinds of films, in these women's pictures, in these melodramas. It happens quite often. It's like a rupture in the glossy, perfect mid-century ideal of American womanhood, that these ruptures are allowed to happen in these films for the dramatic irony, for the, again, for the as a means of illustrating how sort of unnatural and evil these women actually are. But it was allowed to some extent, and that's a big part of why I like these movies so much. And I really enjoyed this one in particular, Leave Her to Heaven. It's super fun to watch. I find it super watchable. The performances are all really great and really fun. And yeah, there's always these little moments of subversion that come through that I think are really interesting, sort of cultural relics that always sort of hint at, what's really going on underneath the perfect picture ideal of the mid-century American family. And that's a big part of why I like these domestic melodramas as much as I do. And I'll definitely be watching several more of these over the course of the month. The Criterion Channel right now is featuring a number of these films in a collection they're calling murderous melodramas. So these are all melodramas like Leave Her to Heaven that feature a crime element or an almost noirish element to them that, again, I think is really interesting. It's really interesting when this film noir style and aesthetic and concepts kind of creep into the domestic space of these melodramas and create a lot of really interesting situations. So yeah, that is my review of Leave Her to Heaven and my discussion of sort of melodrama and women's pictures and why I like them as much as I do. A number of really great actresses were involved in these films, not just Jean Tierney, but like Joan Crawford was in some of these. Deborah Carr was in a number of Douglas Sirk films. Betty Davis did a number of women's pictures and weepies that are really great. All of these actresses, were at their best in some of these films. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Leave Her to Heaven, directed by John M. Stahl from 1946, I think, 45 or 46. Absolutely super fun movie that is available to watch now on the Criterion Channel if you want. Criterion is not paying me, though. I kind of wish they did sometimes. That would be nice. They could pay me. I wouldn't mind that. Yeah, that's what I got today for my midweek movies. If you've seen this film or any other kinds of 1950s melodramas or Douglas Sirk films, let's talk about them in the comments below. Leave a like if you liked this, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.